The voice hidden in the old cassette studio microphone. Daniel had lived his entire life in the quiet shadow of an absence. He was only 6 when his father died, too young to remember the sound of his laugh, too young to carry his face clearly in memory. What remained of his father were fragments, faded photographs, whispered stories from his mother, and a single object that lay untouched for 2 decades, an old audio cassette tucked away in the top drawer of a wooden dresser. His mother once told him, "This is all your father had time to leave, Daniel." His words, his voice, he recorded it the night before he passed. At 9 years old, Daniel had stared at the cassette with trembling fingers, desperate to press play, yet paralyzed by fear. What if it was broken? What if it contained nothing at all? Or worse, what if his father had spoken words he wasn't ready to hear? So the cassette remained there, gathering dust, while Daniel grew up fatherless. Growing up, Daniel carried silence where a father's voice should have been. Other boys had fathers who stood at the sidelines of their games, who taught them how to ride bicycles, to shave, to be men. Daniel had nothing but unanswered questions. Was he enough? Would his father have been proud? Or would he have been disappointed in the son who constantly struggled to find his place in the world? His mother, Sarah, tried her best. She worked long hours at the bakery, her hands always smelling of dough, her back bent from years of sacrifice. Whenever Daniel doubted himself, she would gently say, "Your father believed in you. He used to say you'd go further than either of us ever could." But still, Daniel wrestled with uncertainty, and each time life pushed him down, his eyes would drift to that old drawer, to that cassette, and then away. He wasn't ready. Years passed. Daniel became a man, hardened by struggle but softened by love. He had met Clara, the woman who had seen him at his weakest, and still believed in the strength he couldn't yet see in himself. On the eve of their wedding, sleepless and restless, Daniel returned to his childhood home one last time. The house had aged, the paint peeling, the air filled with memories both tender and heavy. Alone in his mother's old room, his eyes fell upon the familiar drawer. His heart pounded as he pulled it open and found the cassette, its plastic edges cracked, its label faded but still clear. For my son. That night, Daniel knew he could no longer run from a voice he'd been avoiding all his life. Tomorrow he would vow to love, to protect, to build a family of his own. But how could he step into fatherhood without ever knowing the man who had been his? With trembling fingers, he slid the cassette into the dusty player and pressed play. The machine word crackled, and then, after a long pause, came the voice. Daniel froze. His chest tightened, tears welling instantly. It was a voice he had never heard in life, yet recognized as if it had always lived in his bones. Strong, weary, but filled with a tenderness that cut straight through the silence of the years. "If you are hearing this, my son, then I am no longer with you. I wish I had more time, Daniel. I wish I could have seen you grow, heard your laugh, held your hand through this life. But fate has chosen otherwise." Daniel buried his face in his hands, the tears flowing freely. His father's voice continued, each word carving its way into the emptiness Daniel had carried for so long. "I don't know what the world will demand of you, but I do know this. You are stronger than you believe. You carry my blood, yes, but more importantly, you carry your own dreams. Don't let this world convince you that you are too small, too poor, or too weak to reach them. You are more, Daniel. Promise me you'll try. Promise me you'll live." The tape hissed, faltered, and then returned, softer, as though the man behind the voice was speaking through a fading light. "And when you feel alone, when the nights are heavy and the world feels cruel, play this. Let my voice remind you, you were never alone. You are loved, my son. Always." Then silence. The cassette stopped with a hollow click, but the voice lingered in the room, in Daniel's soul, refusing to fade. That night, Daniel wept like the child he had once been, and by dawn he rose as the man his father had believed he could be. At the altar the next day, as he held Clara's hands and vowed to love her, he felt his father's presence for the first time. It was as if the words from that cassette had walked him down the aisle, had given him the courage to build a life filled with love instead of fear. Years later, Daniel became a father himself. He struggled, he stumbled, but he always remembered the voice that had pulled him back from despair. He poured that same strength into his children, teaching them not just how to survive, but how to believe in themselves. And when his son turned 10, Daniel called him into the study. The old cassette player sat on the desk, the same one that had once changed his life. His son looked curious as Daniel pressed play. And once again, the crackling hum filled the room before the voice of a man long gone spoke. Daniel. But this time, it wasn't just Daniel who heard it. His son listened too, wide-eyed, hearing the words of a grandfather he had never met. When the recording ended, Daniel placed his hand on his boy's shoulder and whispered, his voice breaking with love, "This voice, it isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to you too. It is our strength, our reminder that we are never truly alone." The boy nodded, his eyes shimmering, and in that moment, 3 generations were bound together by something more lasting than time. A voice carried through love, a message carved into the soul. The cassette grew older, its tape fragile, its sound fading with each play. But it no longer mattered. The words had already been etched into their hearts. Because voices spoken with love do not die. They echo, they endure, they live forever.